This is poetry in motion right here. I think if you've been paying attention to the YouTube channel over the past few years, you probably recognize that I love a good, well-written story. When there's a narrative here, when there's a comeback story, when there's a good guy and a bad guy, we all love good stories, and that's what we have here. Because you know how in the hockey world, sometimes you have those big what-ifs. Oh, my team traded away this draft pick, and with that draft pick, this other team selected this future Hall of Famer. Oh, my team passed on a guy, and this guy became really good, but now the guy signed with my team, so it's all vindicated now. Today, we're talking about one of these stories, and it all comes to us in the form of the Vladimir Tarasenko signing from a few days ago. Now, we made the entire video. You could go ahead and check it out. Tarasenko signed with the Ottawa Senators, 1 year, $5 million. And the signing is a really good one, for both sides too. You can go ahead and watch the video to talk about why this is good for the Sens, why it's good for Tarasenko, but long story short, the primed St. Louis Blues top scorer is now going over to Ottawa. And this is where we take a look at how things came full circle from over 1 decade ago. The reason I say that is because if you go over to Vladimir Tarasenko and you see where he was taken, he was initially a St. Louis Blues draftee back in 2010, and he was taken in the 16th overall position. Now, unfortunately for elite prospects, they don't actually have scouting reports, or not scouting reports, excuse me. They don't have the draft projection rankings from 10 years ago, so in order to help us out, we're going to go over onto the globeandmail.com, because this article back from 2010, written by James Myrtle, goes over the 2010 board. Now, what Myrtle did 13 years ago was they compiled the list from TSN, McKeen's, ISS, and the Hockey News. Unfortunately, the TSN list is no longer available on their website, but according to this consensus ranking back in 2010, Vladimir Tarasenko was the 13th overall guy. If you go over on the Bleacher Report, they had Tarasenko as the 12th overall guy, however, they said that he could crack the top 10. Back in this time frame in the 2010s, you had Russian players that were very talented and very good, who weren't really all too highly touted because they were Russian. You know how we talk about the Russian effect nowadays? Oh, Michkov might not come to the NHL because he might stay in Russia. It was a bigger deal back in 2010. As a result, you had guys like Tarasenko and Kuznetsov go a lot later in these drafts than they probably should have. And you had some other players like Artemi Panarin, for example, who weren't even drafted, period. But either way, for Vladimir Tarasenko back in 2010, he was taken roughly where he was supposed to go, maybe even a bit further down. These projections had him in the 12 to 13 range, said he could break into the top 10, but he ended up going 16th overall to the Blues. Now, the interesting thing about this draft pick is that the St. Louis Blues actually acquired this 16th overall pick from the Ottawa Senators in exchange for David Rundblad. Now, before we go over the entire story with Tarasenko, I wanted to go over this trade, because this trade ended up happening on the day of the draft. Rundblad was a guy who was initially drafted by the St. Louis Blues in 2009, 17th overall. He was a right-handed defenseman, 6'2", 187, and the Blues traded him away for that Tarasenko draft pick. Before we get into the whys and the hows, let's talk about David Rundblad a little bit and just go over his profile. Back in 08-09, before Rundblad was drafted, he was initially a defenseman in the Skellefteå AIK, playing for the what is now called the SHL. He had 10 points in 45 games played, which, as a 17-year-old right-handed defenseman, you could understand why that was seen as pretty valuable. He also was a mainstay player for Team Sweden at the U19s as well as the World Juniors, and so there was, needless to say, a pretty good amount of hype for a guy who was so young and already playing in a top pro men's league. Here's the scouting report written by elite prospects back from 2010, so we're going over a decade plus into the past to read this one here. Rundblad is an offensive-minded defenseman with very good size and puck skills. He has impressive vision and likes to move the puck into the offensive zone with slick stick handling and good speed. He handles the puck with confidence and has very good poise. A great option from the blue line where he releases a fairly accurate shot and also finds his teammates with tape-to-tape passes. His size and strength is good. In his own end, David Rundblad tends to not play it simple enough at times. He is a tad too creative and could also be more aggressive and determined in his play. If he develops his defensive game, he will be a high-scoring two-way defenseman. If not, he'll still be a capable power play quarterback, but a potential liability in his own end. Man, I love how these older scouting reports are not afraid to lambast the cons on these prospects. More so today, you see scouting reports that are like, oh yeah, this player does this good, that good, and this other thing good. But you never really see too much of the negatives here. Yeah, no, 10 years ago, they said, yeah, this guy's not great in his own end. Either way, he had some pretty good development in 09, 2010. He progressed further into the SHL. He played more at the World Juniors, and he had a pretty good stint. But in that 2010 NHL Entry Draft, Rundblad was traded from St. Louis over to Ottawa in exchange for the draft pick that became Tarasenko. Now, for Rundblad, he was a pretty good prospect, all things considered, because the season after getting traded over to Ottawa in their prospect system as a 20-year-old, he had 50 points in 55 Elitserien games, which was really good. Like, he was almost a point per game right-handed defenseman in the top pro men's league in Sweden. That's not a bad stat line in the slightest. However, Rundblad was unfortunately not able to capitalize on that success and carry it over into the National Hockey League. He played 24 games with the Senators, had 4 points, and then got traded over to the Phoenix Coyotes. He had spent the majority of his season there actually in the AHL. And to his credit, going up and down between the NHL and the AHL, Phoenix Coyotes, Portland Pirates, eventually he was on Chicago, he was pretty okay, but not great. Especially in the AHL, you could see that his numbers slowly started to decline there too, and so in 2015-16, David Rundblad found himself back in Europe playing for the ZSC Lions in the Swiss League. Give it a few more years, and now he's back in the SHL playing for Modo. He recently wrapped up a season in Finland playing for Karpat, where he had 26 points in 60 games played. Rundblad was a right-handed offensive stud that was supposed to be a good defenseman in the NHL, but never amounted to that. Meanwhile, if you take a look at the draft pick that the Sens traded away for Rundblad, that guy ended up becoming Vladimir Tarasenko, and the rest is history. Tarasenko in 2010-2011 showed off pretty okay in the KHL, 19 points, 42 games played, but he was the captain of the World Junior team and was over a point per game there. Very good showcase from Tarasenko. The season after, he was a point per game in the KHL, and the rest is history. Shortly after, he made his St. Louis Blues debut. Initially, was a regular middle to top six forward, but then in 2014-15, this is when Tarasenko exploded. 73 points in 77 games, 37 goals too. Multiple 30 to 40 goal seasons came afterwards, and Vladimir Tarasenko was establishing himself as one of the better young snipers in the NHL. He got a big contract because of this. I remember back when this initial contract was signed, $7.5 million a year till the end of 2023. This contract back in 2015-ish was huge, and we were all like, yeah, this guy's gonna get the bag. He deserves the bag because he's really good. This is hopefully gonna help the St. Louis Blues win the Stanley Cup. And long story short, it did. The guy was a Stanley Cup champion 2018-19. Sure, his point production in that season was not the best in his career, but he was a very great point producer and goal scorer still. 11 goals and 6 assists in the 26-game sample in the playoffs. He eventually found himself back up into point-per-game territory, getting 82 points in 79 games played with the Blues in 21-22. And then followed that up by a pretty nice stint in 22-23, getting 29 points in 38 games. Now, you could say the numbers dropped off, but everybody's numbers on the Blues dropped off, so it's not really his fault. Tarasenko also had 21 points in 31 games with the New York Rangers, who are a pretty stacked team with all the other acquisitions they had gotten. So for Tarasenko today, he's still in the NHL, he's still kicking. We talked about this all in the video the other day when he had initially signed with the Senators, but if this guy can go out there and provide the same sort of production you had with DeBrincat last year, you're honestly laughing. Like, this sets you up pretty nicely to get some good offense, especially since you have Kubalik from that trade. You have Tarasenko building himself up for next year's free agency pool, and if he really likes it at Ottawa, who says he can't go out there and stick around there? So let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. How do you feel about the Tarasenko story coming full circle? He was a St. Louis Blues draftee who was acquired with a draft pick from the Ottawa Senators. David Rundblad was involved in this process, but he's not an NHL player anymore. The Ottawa Senators missed out on the chance to draft Tarasenko, but 13 years later, they have him on their books anyway. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I hope you enjoyed this video. And bye.